What if the person you trusted with your soul was the one who sold you to save his throne? Imagine this. You give him your heart, your life, your forever. Moonlit kisses, whispered vows, the kind of love that makes the world feel safe. Then one night, he looks you in the eyes and trades you like a bargaining chip to his worst enemies. How does that feel? Would your heart shatter? Or would it finally wake up? Because that betrayal didn't break her. It forged her. She became the woman who would walk through fire, learn to love her own scars, and one day stand over the ruins of the kingdom that once owned her, and smile. So tell me, right now honestly, if the man you loved handed you over to save his crown, would you beg to come back, or would you become the storm that burns it all down? Tell me in the comment section. I will love to hear from you. Chapter 1. The Moonlit Vow. The full moon hung low over the ancient forest of Eldoria, casting silver threads through the canopy like whispered secrets. Leora stood at the edge of the sacred clearing, her heart pounding with a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wild jasmine, but beneath it all lingered the primal musk of her pack, the Silver Claws. She was no ordinary wolf. Born under a blood moon, her fur gleamed like polished obsidian, and her eyes held the storm of untamed power. Yet tonight, she felt vulnerable, exposed, as if the moon itself were peeling back her layers. Darius, the alpha king of the Silver Claws, approached her with the grace of a predator who knew he owned the night, his broad shoulders strained against his tunic, muscles honed from years of battles and hunts, his golden eyes locked onto hers, burning with an intensity that made her knees weaken. "Leora," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. "You are my moon, my light in the endless dark." He reached out, his fingers tracing the curve of her jaw, sending sparks of heat dancing across her skin. She leaned into his touch, her breath catching as his thumb brushed her lower lip. They had been fated mates since the first time. Their eyes met during the great hunt. Darius had claimed her not with force, but with a tenderness that belied his ruthless reputation. He was the king who had united fractured packs, forging an empire from blood and loyalty. And she was his queen, his confidant, the one who soothed his savage heart. "I trust you with my life," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her words. It was more than a vow. It was her soul laid bare. In a world where betrayal lurked in every shadow, where rival packs like the Shadowfang circled like vultures, Darius was her anchor. He pulled her close, his arms enveloping her in warmth that chased away the chill of the night. Their lips met in a kiss that started soft, exploratory, like the first raindrop of a storm. But passion ignited quickly, as it always did between them. His hands roamed down her back, pressing her against him, the hard planes of his body molding to her softer curves. She gasped as his mouth trailed to her neck, nipping gently at the sensitive spot where her pulse raced. "You are mine," he growled, his breath hot against her skin. "And I am yours forever." Leora's fingers tangled in his dark hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, tongues dancing in a rhythm that mirrored the wild beat of their hearts. Heat pooled in her core, a delicious ache that made her arch into him. His hand slid lower, cupping her hips, lifting her slightly off the ground as if she weighed nothing. She wrapped her legs around his waist, feeling the evidence of his desire press against her. A soft moan escaped her lips, muffled by his kiss. The world faded, the forest, the moon, the distant howls, until there was only them, lost in a haze of need and love. But even in this bliss, a shadow lingered in Darius's eyes, one Leora chose to ignore. The kingdom was crumbling. Whispers of rebellion stirred among the packs and the Shadowfangs, led by the cunning Alpha Thorn. No, wait, not that name. Led by the ruthless Alpha Victor, grew bolder. Darius had confided in her about the mounting threats, the spies in their midst, the fragile alliances. "I would do anything to protect our crown," he had said once, his voice laced with determination. She had smiled then, proud of his strength, never imagining the cost. As they broke apart, breathless and flushed, Darius set her down gently. "The council awaits," he said, his tone shifting to the regal command of a king. The mating ceremony was tonight, a public declaration that would solidify their bond and his rule. Leora nodded, her heart swelling with joy. She slipped her hand into his, feeling the calluses from his claws, a reminder of the beast within. Together they walked toward the grand hall, where torches flickered like stars fallen to earth. The hall was alive with the packs. Elite, warriors with scars telling tales of glory, elders with wisdom etched in their furrowed brows, and young wolves eager for the future. Leora stood tall beside Darius on the dais, her gown of midnight silk clinging to her form, accentuating the swell of her breasts and the curve of her waist. He placed the silver crown upon her head, its weight a symbol of their shared destiny. "With this I bind you to me," he declared, his voice echoing. The pack howled in approval, a chorus that vibrated through her very soul. But as the night wore on, feasting and dancing under the moon's gaze, Leora noticed Darius's distraction. His smiles were forced, his touches brief. When he excused himself to meet with advisors, she followed discreetly, her wolf senses sharpening. Hidden in the shadows, she overheard fragments. "The Shadowfangs demand tribute. Our borders weaken. A sacrifice must be made." Her blood ran cold. Sacrifice? What did he mean? She confronted him later, in the privacy of their chambers. The room was dimly lit by candles, the bed inviting with its fur throws. Darius pulled her into his arms again, but this time his embrace felt desperate. "Trust me, my love," he pleaded, his lips crashing against hers with urgency. She melted into him, her doubts dissolving in the fire of his passion. He lifted her onto the bed, his hands exploring her body with reverence and hunger. You are everything," he whispered, peeling away her gown to reveal her bare skin. His mouth followed, kissing a trail down her collarbone, lingering on the peak of her breast. Leora arched, a whimper escaping as his tongue teased her nipple, sending jolts of pleasure through her. His fingers dipped lower, finding her wet and ready, stroking her with expert precision. "Darius," she moaned, her nails digging into his back, urging him on. He shed his clothes swiftly, his arousal evident and throbbing. Positioning himself between her thighs, he entered her slowly, savoring the connection. Their bodies moved in sync, a dance of love and lust. Each thrust built the tension, her walls clenching around him, drawing out groans from deep in his chest. The room filled with their shared breaths, the slap of skin, the crescendo of ecstasy. As they climaxed together, waves of pleasure crashing over them. Leora felt a profound happiness, a smile tugging at her lips even as tears of joy pricked her eyes. This was love, raw and real. But in the afterglow as she lay in his arms, Darius's face darkened. "The council has decided," he said softly, his voice pained. "To save the kingdom, we must appease Victor. They demand you." Leora's world shattered. "Me?" she whispered, pain slicing through her like claws. He couldn't meet her eyes. "It's temporary. A hostage exchange to buy peace. I have no choice, and the crown our people." Betrayal burned in her chest, hot and agonizing. She had trusted him with her life, and he was selling her to the enemies. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of sorrow and rage. Yet in that moment a spark ignited, a fierce determination. This pain would not break her. It would remake her. As guards dragged her away at dawn, Leora's last glance at Darius was filled with a sad smile. "You created this," she thought, her heart aching with lost love. But deep down a twisted happiness bloomed. She would return, stronger, and his kingdom would feel her wrath. Chapter 2. Shadows of Captivity. The iron gates of Victor's fortress clanged shut behind her like the jaws of fate itself. Dawn had barely broken, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, when Leora was marched through the shadowed corridors of Blackthorn. Keep chains bit into her wrists. Not silver, thankfully, but cold steel that reminded her every second of her fall. Her midnight gown, once flowing and regal, now hung torn and dirt-streaked, clinging to her skin like a lover's regret. She kept her head high, refusing to let the guards see the tremor in her lips or the way her heart cracked anew with every step. Darius's face haunted her, those golden eyes, once full of adoration, now etched with guilt as he turned away. "It's temporary," he'd whispered. Lies, all of it. The pain was a living thing inside her chest, sharp and relentless, yet beneath it simmered something dangerous. A quiet, burning smile of realization. He had sold her to save his crown. In doing so, he had freed something wilder in her soul. Victor waited in the great hall, lounging on a throne carved from obsidian and wolfbone. He was everything the rumors painted, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair the color of midnight storms and eyes like molten amber, predatory, unyielding yet strangely searching. His scent hit her first. Smoke, leather, and something darker, more primal than Darius's clean pine and moonlight essence. It wrapped around her, invasive, intoxicating. "So," Victor drawled, rising slowly, "the Silverclaw Queen arrives. Or should I say, former queen?" His voice was velvet over steel, low enough to vibrate through her bones. Leora met his gaze without flinching. I am no one's former anything. You may have my body in chains, but my spirit remains mine. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. We'll see about that. He gestured, and the guards shoved her forward. She stumbled but caught herself, refusing to kneel. Victor circled her like a wolf sizing up prey, close enough that she felt the heat radiating from him. His fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, gentle, almost tender, and the touch sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. Take her to the lower chambers, he ordered. Clean her, feed her. I want her room presentable. The lower chambers were not the dank dungeon she'd feared. Instead, a cavernous stone room opened to a steaming pool fed by underground springs, lit by flickering torches and shafts of pale moonlight filtering through high slits. Guards unchained her wrists, though iron manacles remained at her ankles. A female attendant, silent, eyes downcast, helped her out of the ruined gown. Leora stood naked under the cool air, arms crossed over her breasts, dignity her only armor. Then Victor entered. He wore only loose trousers, chest bare and scarred from countless battles, muscles shifting like coiled power beneath his skin. Steam curled around him as he approached the pool. Leave us, he told the attendant. She fled without a word. Leora tensed. If you think... Peace, he said softly, raising a hand. I have no intention of forcing anything tonight, but you stink of Silver Claw arrogance and betrayal. Wash it off. He stepped into the water first, the surface rippling around his hips. Leora hesitated, pride warring with exhaustion. The water called to her, warm, soothing, promising relief for aching muscles. Slowly, she descended the steps, the heat enveloping her like an embrace she didn't want to crave. Victor kept distance at first, letting her submerge, letting the water lap at her shoulders. But then he moved closer, a sponge in hand. Turn, he murmured. She did, back to him, vulnerable. His touch was careful, almost reverent, as he washed the grime from her skin. Fingers trailed along her spine, slow circles that made her breath hitch. Sadness welled up. This gentleness felt like mockery after Darius's desperate passion, yet the pain twisted strangely, blooming into heat low in her belly. His hand slid to her shoulders, thumbs pressing into tense muscles, kneading until she bit back a sigh. You tremble, he observed, voice husky. Fear? Or something else? Anger, she lied, but her voice cracked. His chuckle was low, intimate. Liar. He turned her gently to face him. Water streamed down her body, droplets catching moonlight on her breasts. Victor's gaze darkened, tracing every curve with raw hunger, yet he didn't touch, not yet. Instead, he lifted a handful of water, letting it cascade over her collarbone, watching it trail between her breasts. You trusted him, Victor said quietly, almost sadly. With everything, and he handed you over like a bargaining chip. Tears pricked her eyes, hot, furious. Don't speak his name. I won't. But I will speak truth. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear that escaped. He thought he was saving his kingdom. Instead, he woke a storm. Leora searched his face, finding no cruelty there, only a shadowed understanding, as if he too had known betrayal. Her hand rose, almost of its own accord, pressing against his chest. His heart thundered beneath her palm, strong and steady. The contact sparked electricity between them, painful in its sweetness. She wanted to hate him, this enemy who now held her life, yet his nearness stirred something forgotten, desire untainted by lies. Victor's fingers slid into her wet hair, tilting her head back. Their faces inches apart, breaths mingling in the steam. I could take you now, he whispered, lips brushing her ear. Claim what he discarded. But I want more than your body, Leora. I want the fire he tried to extinguish. She shivered, not from cold. Her nipples tightened under his gaze, aching. The water lapped at them both as he drew her closer, bodies brushing, his hardness pressing against her thigh through thin fabric. A soft gasp escaped her. His mouth hovered over hers, teasing, promising. Then he pulled back, eyes blazing. Not tonight. When you come to me, it will be because you choose it. Because the pain he left has burned away everything but want. He stepped out of the pool, water sluicing off him, leaving her breathless and aching. Alone now, Leora sank deeper into the warmth, fingers trailing her own skin where his had been. Tears fell freely, sad for the love she'd lost, painful for the humiliation, yet a small secret smile curved her lips. Victor saw her, not as a prize, but as a force, and in that recognition something inside her began to heal and sharpen. Later, in the dim light of her guarded chamber, she lay on furs, staring at the moon through barred windows. A guard slipped a note under the door, Darius's seal. Her fingers shook as she opened it. "My love, forgive me, this is temporary, I will come for you, hold on." She crumpled it, heart twisting. Sadness crashed over her like a wave, memories of their nights flooding back. His tender kisses, his desperate thrusts, the way he'd whispered forever against her skin. Pain lanced deep. Yet she felt a quiet, fierce happiness too. She was no longer the trusting queen. She was becoming something more. Footsteps echoed outside. Victor appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against torchlight. "Sleep, little storm," he said softly. "Tomorrow we begin your true education." As the door closed, Leora touched the spot on her cheek where he'd brushed away her tear. A spark of anticipation flickered amid the grief. She trusted Darius with her life once. Now she trusted only herself and perhaps dangerously the enemy who saw her worth. But in the shadows of Blackthorn Keep, whispers stirred. Darius's spies had infiltrated the outer walls. They carried messages of rescue or retribution. Leora closed her eyes, a single tear slipping free, yet her lips curved in a small, dangerous smile. The game had only just begun. Chapter 3. Whispers of Rebellion. Leora did not sleep. The furs beneath her were soft, almost mocking in their comfort, but her mind refused to quiet. Victor's parting words echoed in the dark. "Tomorrow, we begin your true education," and Darius's crumpled note burned against her palm like a brand. She turned the parchment over and over, tracing the familiar slant of his handwriting, until the ink blurred beneath, the salt of unshed tears. "Hold on." She almost laughed. A small broken sound that died in her throat. Hold on to what? The memory of his mouth on hers in the moonlight, the way he used to cradle her face as though she were made of glass and starlight, or the moment he looked away while the guards took her wrists. The pain was not loud anymore. It had settled deep, a dull, constant ache beneath her ribs, the kind that made every breath feel borrowed. And yet strangely, it no longer felt like drowning. It felt like kindling. She rose before first light. The chamber door was unlocked. Another deliberate choice from Victor, she suspected. He wanted her to wander, to test, to choose movement over surrender. Barefoot, she slipped into the corridor, the stone cool against her soles. Blackthorn Keep was not beautiful like the Silverclaw halls. It was honest. Rough-hewn walls, iron sconces spitting low flames, tapestries depicting ancient battles where no one smiled in victory. Every corner smelled faintly of smoke and wet earth and something alive, something that watched. She found the training yard by following the sound of steel. Dawn was gray and thin when she stepped into the open air. A handful of Shadowfang warriors were already moving through forms, slow, deliberate, lethal. At the far end stood Victor, shirtless despite the morning chill, wooden practice blade in hand. He was sparring with a younger wolf, a lean female with cropped silver hair and eyes like chipped flint. They moved like water over stone, fast, unhurried, inevitable. Leora stayed in the shadow of an archway, watching. Victor's body told stories his voice never would. Scars laced his back and ribs, old claw marks, blade kisses, burns that had healed unevenly. Yet he moved without hesitation, without apology. When the silver-haired warrior lunged, he caught her wrist, twisted, sent her sprawling with controlled grace. Then he offered a hand. She took it. They nodded once. Respect, not pity. Something tight in Leora's chest loosened. She stepped into the light. Heads turned. Conversation died. Victor's gaze found her immediately. Amber eyes narrowing, not in surprise but in recognition, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she answered simply. A murmur rippled through the yard. Someone laughed low. Victor silenced them with a glance. He tossed the practice blade aside and gestured to a rack of wooden weapons. "Choose." Leora walked forward, aware of every eye on her. She selected a shorter blade, light, balanced for speed rather than brute force. When she turned, Victor was already in the center of the ring, empty-handed. "No weapon?" she asked. "I don't need one to teach you." The words should have stung. Instead, they lit something inside her, small, hot, defiant. They circled. He did not taunt. He did not gloat. He simply moved, fluid, patient, reading her like an open scroll. When she struck first, a clean, diagonal slash meant to test, he stepped inside her guard, caught her wrist mid-motion, and pressed just enough to make her feel the strength behind his restraint. "Too wide," he murmured, close enough that she smelled cedar and iron on his skin. "You're still fighting like a queen who expects the world to part for her." She twisted free, heart hammering, not from fear but from the sudden dizzying thrill of being seen so clearly. They began again. Strike, block, pivot, breath again. Sweat gathered at her temples. Her muscles burned in a way that felt almost holy. Every time he corrected her, gentle pressure on her elbow, a murmured, "Lower your center," a tap against her ribs to show where she had left herself open. Something inside her shifted. Not toward him, not yet. Toward herself. The yard had gone quiet. No jeers, no mockery. Only the sound of wood meeting wood, feet scuffing dirt, and the ragged music of two people breathing hard. When she finally landed a clean strike against his forearm, nothing damaging, just enough to make him grunt, Victor smiled. Not the dangerous curve he wore in the bath chamber. A real one. Small. Proud. "Well done," he said. She lowered the blade. Her arms trembled. Her lungs ached. And yet her mouth curved unbidden into an answering smile. Tiny. Pained. But real. For the first time since the gates of Blackthorn closed behind her, she felt the ghost of joy. They did not speak of it. Instead, he walked her to the edge of the yard where a low stone bench overlooked the mist-wreathed valley. They sat, close enough that their shoulders nearly brushed, far enough that neither had to acknowledge it. Below them, the Shadowfang lands stretched dark and wild. Somewhere beyond those ridges lay Silverclaw territory. Somewhere beyond those ridges, Darius was probably planning his next move, telling himself it was all for the crown, for the pack, for her. Leora's fingers tightened around the hilt of the practice blade she still held. "He wrote to me," she said quietly. "Last night, said it was temporary, said to hold on." Victor did not flinch, did not offer empty comfort. He simply asked, "Do you believe him?" She looked down at the valley for a long time. "I believe he believes it," she answered at last. "That's what makes it hurt most." Silence settled between them, comfortable, not heavy. After a while, Victor spoke again, voice low. "When I was younger, I trusted someone with my name, my blood, my future. She sold it all for a prettier throne and a softer bed. I survived. But I stopped believing in temporary." Leora turned to him. His profile was stark against the rising light, jaw tight, eyes distant. "Is that why you look at me like I might break?" she asked. "No," he met her gaze. "I look at you like you might finally begin." Her breath caught. Not because the words were beautiful, though they were, but because they were honest. No seduction, no possession, just truth, laid bare in the gray dawn. She felt the ache again, sharp and familiar. But this time it came with something new. A flicker of warmth. Not love, not yet, but possibility. The painful, lovely possibility that she might still be someone worth fighting for. Even if the one who should have fought hardest had already walked away. She stood. "I want to train again tomorrow," she said. Victor rose too. "Then you will." As she turned to leave, he spoke once more, soft, almost reluctant. "Leora," she paused. "If you ever decide to send a message back to him," he said, "make it honest. Not for his sake, for yours." She did not answer. She did not need to. She walked back through the corridors with the wooden blade still in her hand, sweat cooling on her skin, heart strangely steady. In her chamber, she set the blade beside the bed. Then she took Darius's note, smoothed it flat, and for the first time, read it without tears. She did not cry. Instead, she smiled, small, sad, secret, and in the quiet of early morning, alone with her own heartbeat, she began to plan. Outside, ravens called across the valley. Somewhere far away, war drums were beginning to sound. Chapter 4. Fractured Alliances. Leora did not send the note back. She folded Darius's letter once more, smaller this time, until it was a tight square no larger than her thumbnail. Then she slipped it beneath the edge of the mattress, out of sight, out of reach. Not destroyed. Not yet. She wasn't ready to burn the last thread that still tied her to the man she had once loved beyond reason. But she also wasn't ready to answer it. Morning came again, colder now, the mist clinging to the valley like a shroud. She returned to the training yard without being summoned. Victor was already there, alone this time, running through a sequence of movements so slow they looked like prayer. His breath clouded in the air. When he saw her, he stopped, lowered his hands, and simply waited. She picked up the same wooden blade from yesterday. They did not speak of the note. They did not speak of anything at first, they only moved. Today the sparring felt different. Less like instruction, more like conversation. Every block, every feint, every shift of weight carried unspoken questions. Why did you stay silent? Why do you keep coming back here? Why does your gaze linger when you think I'm not looking? When she overextended on a thrust and he caught her wrist again, he did not release her immediately. His thumb rested lightly over her pulse point, feeling the frantic beat. Neither of them moved. You're angry today, he said quietly. I'm always angry now, she answered. It's just quieter some days. He let go. She stepped back. They circled once more. After the session ended, both of them breathing hard, skin damp despite the chill, Victor gestured toward a narrow path that led away from the yard, up the slope behind the keep. Come, he said. She followed. The path wound through pines until it opened onto a small hidden grotto. A spring bubbled from dark rock, feeding a shallow pool no larger than a bed. Ferns clung to the walls. Moss softened every surface. Sunlight pierced the canopy in thin golden spears. It was the most beautiful place she had seen since leaving Silverclaw lands. Victor sat on a flat stone at the water's edge. After a moment, she joined him. Not too close, but close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his body. He pulled a small leather pouch from his belt and offered it to her. Inside were dried berries and strips of smoked venison. Simple. Honest. She ate slowly. He watched the water. After a long silence, he spoke. Last night, one of my scouts intercepted a Silverclaw messenger. Not one of the usual spies, someone carrying a sealed missive meant for you. It bore the king's personal crest. Leora's hand stilled halfway to her mouth. He wants a meeting, Victor continued. Neutral ground, tomorrow at dusk, the old stone circle on the border ridge. He says he comes alone. He says he comes to explain. Her throat closed. She set the food down untouched. And what did you do with the messenger, she asked. Sent him back with a message of my own. That if the Silverclaw King wants words, he will have them, but only if you agree to hear them. She looked at Victor then. Really looked. His face was unreadable, yet she saw the tension at the corners of his mouth, the faint shadow beneath his eyes. This was not generosity. This was a test. For her. For him. Why would you allow it, she whispered. Because I want to know what you will choose when the past stands in front of you again. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples spread through her chest, pain, fear, a strange, aching gratitude. She stood and walked to the pool's edge. The water was so clear she could see the pebbles at the bottom, smooth and patient. She crouched, dipped her fingers in. The cold shocked her skin awake. I loved him, she said, voice so soft it almost disappeared. I still feel the shape of that love inside me, like a room I used to live in. The furniture is gone, but I remember where everything stood. Victor rose and came to stand beside her, not touching, just near. When the person who was supposed to guard that room hands the key to strangers, he said, the room doesn't vanish. It simply changes locks. She looked up at him. Tears stood bright in her eyes, but they did not fall. I don't know if I can face him, she admitted. Then don't, he answered simply. But if you do, go knowing you are not the woman who left. You are the one who came back stronger. She searched his face and found no triumph there, only quiet certainty. Something inside her cracked open, not broken, but released. A small, trembling happiness bloomed in the wreckage of her grief. Not because the pain had vanished, because someone saw it and did not look away. She reached out, slowly, hesitantly, and laid her palm against his forearm. The muscle beneath her hand flexed once, then stilled. His skin was warm, his pulse steady. Thank you, she whispered. He covered her hand with his own, large, calloused, gentle. They stayed like that for a long time, two silhouettes against the grotto's green heart breathing in time with the spring. When they finally returned to the keep, the sun was high and the yard was full again. Warriors nodded to her now, not in deference, but in acknowledgement. She had become part of the rhythm here, whether she meant to or not. That night she sat at the narrow window of her chamber, watching the moon rise. She thought of tomorrow, of the stone circle, of Darius's face, the way it used to soften when he looked at her. She thought of Victor's hand over hers in the grotto, steady as stone. She did not sleep. Instead she wrote, not to Darius, to herself. A single line on a scrap of parchment she would carry tomorrow. You are not returning to him. You are walking forward through him. When dawn came, she dressed in Shadowfang leathers, dark, fitted, practical. No gown, no crown, just herself. She met Victor at the gate. He studied her for a long moment. You're going, he said, not a question. Yes. He nodded once. Then go with clear eyes, he told her, and come back with the same. She stepped past him through the open gate into the pale morning. Behind her, the keep doors closed with a soft final sound. Ahead lay the ridge, the circle, the man who had once held her entire world. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a small fierce smile took root. Sad, yes, still aching with old love, but also bright with the terrible, lovely certainty that she was no longer waiting to be saved. She was choosing. Chapter 5. The Beast Within. Leora did not look back as the gate of Blackthorn Keep shrank behind her. The path to the border ridge was narrow and steep, lined with wind-twisted pines that leaned like old sentinels keeping secrets. Each step upward pulled the air thinner, sharper, until it tasted of iron and coming rain. Her boots found purchase on loose shale. Her breath came steady, deliberate. She carried no weapon beyond the small knife strapped to her thigh and the scrap of parchment tucked against her heart. Her own words to herself, written in the dark. You are not returning to him. You are walking forward through him. The stone circle appeared at dusk exactly as promised. A ring of 9 weathered monoliths standing on the crest of the ridge, their surfaces etched with runes older than any living pack. The sky had gone the color of bruised plums. Wind moved through the stones like a sigh. Darius was already there. He stood alone in the center, just as he had said he would. No guards, no banners. Only the man she had once known better than her own reflection. His dark hair was longer now, unkempt. A fresh scar curved along his left cheekbone, someone else's claws perhaps. He wore the simple gray cloak of a traveler, but she still saw the king beneath it, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes searching the path until they found her. When she stepped into the circle, the wind fell silent, as though the stones themselves were listening. Leora, he breathed. The sound of her name in his voice cracked something inside her chest, soft, sudden, painful. She stopped 5 paces away. He took 1 step toward her, then halted when she did not mirror it. You came, he said. I needed to see if the man who wrote that letter still existed. His gaze dropped to the ground between them. I never stopped existing, I just failed you. The admission hung there, raw and unadorned, no excuses, no royal flourish, just truth stripped bare. She felt the old love rise like a tide, warm, familiar, heartbreaking, and at the same time the new anger, cold and bright, held it back. They stood in perfect opposition inside her, pulling in different directions until she thought she might tear in half. I read your words, she said quietly. Temporary, you called it. Hold on, you said. I meant them. Did you? Her voice stayed even, but the tremor lived beneath. When the chains went around my wrists, did you mean them then? When Victor's gates closed behind me, were you still holding on to the promise? Or had you already let go to keep your crown safe? Darius flinched as though she had struck him. He looked older in that moment, lines carved deeper around his eyes, mouth tight with something that might have been shame. I told myself it was strategy, he said. 1 life traded for thousands. 1 heart broken to save an entire people. I told myself I would bring you back before the moon turned again. I told myself 1,000 lies so I could sleep at night. He lifted his eyes to hers. They were wet, not tears, not yet, but close. But every night I dreamed of your face when they took you. Every morning I woke tasting ash. I was wrong, Leora. I was so terribly wrong. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run into his arms and let the past swallow them both. She wanted to turn and walk away forever. Instead, she asked the only question that still mattered. Do you still love me? The wind picked up again, tugging at her hair, at the edges of his cloak. With everything I have left, he answered, even if it's not enough, even if you never forgive me. Silence stretched. The stones watched. Then slowly she reached into her tunic and drew out the folded parchment, his letter. She held it between them like an offering, or perhaps a verdict. I carried this the whole way here, she said. Not because I believed it anymore, because I needed to remember what belief felt like before it broke. She opened her fingers. The wind caught the small square and lifted it, spinning it upward like a pale moth before it disappeared over the ridge. Darius watched it go. His shoulders sagged, just a fraction. I don't expect forgiveness, he said softly. I only wanted you to know I'm still fighting. For our people, yes, but mostly for the right to look you in the eye again one day without flinching. She studied him, really studied him. The scar, the exhaustion, the stubborn hope still flickering behind the guilt. And something inside her shifted. Not back to the woman who had trusted him with her life. Not forward into blind vengeance. Sideways into something quieter. Something truer. I'm not coming back, she told him. The words came out gentle, almost kind. Not the way you want, not the way we were. He nodded once, slowly, as though he had already known. But I'm not your enemy either, she continued. Not yet, maybe never. That depends on what you do next. She took one step closer, not to embrace, but to make sure he heard every syllable. If you raise your army against Blackthorn, if you come for me like a prize to be reclaimed, then yes, I will become the storm you created. But if you choose differently, if you choose peace, if you choose to be the king I once believed you could be, then perhaps there is still a path where we don't destroy each other. Darius swallowed. And if I choose peace? Then you start by dismantling the lie that your crown is worth more than the people wearing it. You start by listening to the Pax who never wanted this war. You start by remembering that a king without honor is only a man wearing metal. He looked at her for a long time. I'm trying, he whispered. I swear to every moon I've ever howled under, I'm trying. She believed him. Not because the words were perfect, because they were broken, honest human. A small, sad smile touched her lips, the same one that had begun in the training yard, in the grotto, in the quiet hours alone. It hurt. It also felt like breathing after too long underwater. I have to go back now, she said. He nodded again. Will I see you again? I don't know. She turned then, not in anger, not in haste, but with the calm of someone who had finally chosen her own direction. As she walked down the ridge, the first stars appeared above the stones. The wind carried the faint, distant howl of a lone wolf. Not Silverclaw, not Shadowfang. Just a voice in the dark, calling to no one and everyone. Leora lifted her face to the sky and answered with a low, soft sound of her own. Not rage, not grief, but something fiercer. Acceptance. And beneath it, rising like dawn through mist, a bright, trembling joy. She was no longer waiting for anyone to define her worth. She was becoming it. Behind her, Darius remained in the circle until she was gone from sight. Then he sank to one knee, pressed his forehead to the cold stone, and, for the first time since the night he lost her, let the tears come. Chapter 6, Echoes of Betrayal. The descent from the ridge felt longer than the climb. Night had fully claimed the sky by the time Leora reached the lower slopes, stars sharp as knife points overhead. Her boots crunched on frost-kissed gravel. Each sound seemed amplified in the quiet that followed her conversation with Darius. She carried no lantern, did not need one. Moonlight silvered the path ahead, and something fiercer inside her lit the way. She did not hurry. She let the cold air burn her lungs, let the ache in her legs remind her she was still moving forward under her own power. Every few paces she paused, closed her eyes, and listened. To the wind, threading through pines, to the distant trickle of a stream, to the slow, steady drum of her own heart. It no longer raced with panic or grief. It beat with something calmer, something inevitable. When Blackthorn Keep rose into view, its jagged silhouette black against the indigo sky, she felt no dread. Only a quiet certainty that whatever waited inside those walls, she would meet it as herself. The gate guards recognized her immediately. They did not speak. They simply stepped aside. One of them dipped his head in a gesture that felt closer to respect than protocol. She walked past, without acknowledgement, straight through the outer courtyard, past the training yard still faintly scented with sweat and pine resin, up the wide stone steps into the keep proper. Victor was waiting in the great hall. He stood near the massive hearth, back to the flames, arms folded across his chest. Firelight carved deep shadows across his face, turning his amber eyes to molten gold. He did not move when she entered. He simply watched her cross the long room, boots echoing on flagstones until she stopped a few paces away. Neither spoke at first. The fire snapped. A log settled with a soft hiss of sparks. Finally, Victor asked low and even, "Did he beg?" "No." She met his gaze without flinching. He confessed. He wept. He promised to try. Victor's jaw tightened. Just once, a flicker so brief she might have imagined it. "And you?" I told him I am not coming back the way he remembers. She took one slow breath. I told him if he raises his banners against this place, I will stand against him. Not for revenge. For the truth that a crown should never cost more souls than it protects. Silence stretched again, thick with everything unsaid. Then Victor stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until only a hand's breadth separated them. Close enough that she could smell cedar smoke and iron on his skin, close enough to see the faint tremor at the corner of his mouth. "You could have stayed with him," he said quietly. "One word from you tonight and he would have carried you home on his knees." "I know. So why are you standing here instead?" She searched his face, the scars, the guarded hope, the quiet storm behind his eyes, and felt the answer rise like heat from deep inside. "Because home stopped being a place the night he traded me for it." Her voice stayed soft, but the words carried weight. "And because someone finally looked at the broken pieces of me and didn't ask me to be whole again. Just asked me to keep moving." Victor exhaled, a rough, almost pained sound. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he reached out, not to touch her face, not to pull her close, but to rest 2 fingers lightly against the center of her chest, right over her heart. The contact was small, careful, reverent. She felt it through leather and linen like a brand made of sunlight. "Your heart is racing," he murmured. "Yours isn't," she whispered back. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, sad, wry, beautiful. "It hasn't stopped since you walked out that gate this morning." She covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm flat against the steady thunder beneath her ribs. They stood like that. 2 statues caught in firelight, while the world narrowed to the space between their joined hands and the unspoken promise it carried. Not possession, not rescue, simply presence. After a long moment she spoke again, voice barely above a breath. "There will be blood soon. I know. Darius won't wait forever. His counsel will push. His pride will push harder." Victor nodded once. "Then we prepare." She searched his eyes. "Not just weapons, not just walls. We prepare the packs, the ones who never asked for this war. The ones who are tired of bleeding for crowns that don't bleed for them." Something fierce and bright flashed across his face. "You want to talk to them?" "I want them to hear themselves think," she said. "I want them to remember what loyalty feels like when it isn't demanded at sword point." He studied her for several heartbeats. Then he stepped back, just enough to bow his head in a gesture that felt ancient, almost ceremonial. "Then speak to them," he said. "Tomorrow, in the lower hall. I'll gather who will come. The rest will hear the echo." She felt it then, the first true spark of something larger than pain, larger than love lost or found. A quiet, radiant happiness threaded through the sorrow still lodged in her chest. Not because everything was mended, because she was finally building something that could not be taken away. She turned toward the corridor that led to her chamber, then paused. "Victor." He looked up. "When the fighting comes," she said, "I will stand beside you, not behind, not in front, beside." His throat worked. "I know." She gave him the smallest, most honest smile she had worn in weeks, sat at the edges, bright at the center, and walked away. Behind her the fire roared on. In the lower corridors she passed a young Shadowfang scout returning from patrol. He carried fresh reports. Silverclaw banners massing near the western passes, supply lines stretched thin, murmurs of desertion among the outer packs. War was no longer a whisper. It was breathing down their necks. Leora reached her chamber, closed the door softly and leaned against it for a long moment. Then she crossed to the narrow window and looked out at the moon-drenched valley. Somewhere out there, Darius was staring at the same sky, carrying the weight of choices he could never unmake. Here she carried the weight of choices she was finally free to make. She touched the place on her chest where Victor's fingers had rested. A small, fierce joy bloomed beneath her fingertips, painful in its clarity, lovely in its defiance. She was no longer the woman who had been sold. She was the woman who would never be sold again. And tomorrow, she would begin teaching others the same truth. Outside, a lone wolf howled, a long, mournful note that rose and fell like a question. Leora lifted her chin and answered with her own low, steady call. Not a cry for help. An announcement. She had arrived. Chapter 7 Forged in Fire. Leora did not return to her chamber that night. Instead, she walked the lower corridors until she found the wide stone hall Victor had mentioned. A cavernous space carved deep into the mountain's heart, lit only by iron braziers that threw long, dancing shadows across the walls. The air smelled of damp rock, old smoke, and the faint metallic tang of anticipation. Benches had already been dragged into rough rows. A low platform stood at the far end like a stage no one had yet dared to claim. She did not wait for dawn. She stepped onto the platform, bare feet silent against the cold stone, and simply stood there until the first shadow fangs began to trickle in. Scouts returning from night patrols, smiths still dusted with soot, mothers carrying sleeping children against their shoulders, elders leaning on carved staffs. They came quietly, eyes wary but curious. No one spoke to her. No one challenged her presence. They simply filled the benches and waited. Victor arrived last. He did not take the platform. He leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, face half in shadow, giving her the space without ever saying the words. When the hall could hold no more, Leora drew one long breath and began. I am not one of you, she said, voice carrying clear and steady to every corner. I was born under a different moon, raised in halls that smelled of pine and silver instead of stone and iron. I wore a crown once. It was taken from me, not by enemies, but by the man who promised to guard it with me. A low murmur moved through the crowd, not hostile, only attentive. I was sold, she continued. Traded like a bolt of silk or a sack of grain so one kingdom could breathe another day. And in that moment, when the chains closed and the gates shut, I learned something no throne ever taught me. She paused, letting the silence press in. Loyalty is not owed, it is chosen. Every day, every breath. And when it is demanded instead of earned, it turns to ash in the mouth. She looked out at their faces, scarred, young, weary, fierce, and felt the ache in her own chest mirror theirs. I have seen what happens when a crown becomes heavier than the people wearing it. I have watched brothers turn on brothers, packs fracture, children lose parents, all because someone decided their name on a map mattered more than the heart still beating beneath it. A young warrior near the front shifted, fists clenched at his sides. I am not here to ask you to fight for me, Leora said. I am not here to promise victory or vengeance or even safety. I am here to ask you something simpler, something harder. She stepped to the edge of the platform. Will you fight for the life you actually want to live? Not the one someone else wrote for you. Not the one carved in old blood feuds. The one you wake up wishing for when the moon is quiet and the world is still. Silence answered her first, deep breathing silence. Then an older woman near the back stood. Her hair was streaked gray, one eye clouded white from some long-ago wound. My son died on the western ridge 2 winters past, she said, voice rough but steady. He was 19. He died because our alpha at the time wanted a strip of land no one had grazed in generations. I buried him under stones because there was no body left to bury. Tell me why I should trust any crown now. Yours, theirs, anyone's. Leora met the woman's gaze without flinching. You shouldn't, she answered. Not blindly. Trust the person who stands beside you in the mud, who shares bread when there is none left, who looks at your grief and does not turn away. Trust the ones who choose you back. She looked across the hall again. I choose you. Not as subjects, not as soldiers, as people who deserve more than endless war for someone else's pride. A ripple moved through the room. Soft gasps, indrawn breaths, a few heads nodding slowly. Victor had not moved from the wall, but his eyes never left her. Then a boy, no more than 15, stood up near the middle benches. His voice cracked when he spoke. My sister ran to the Silverclaws last spring. Said she'd rather take her chances with their fields than starve here. She writes sometimes. Says they're kinder than we were told. Says the new alpha there is trying to change things. He looked straight at Leora. Is it true? She thought of Darius kneeling in the stone circle, tears on his face, promising to try. I believe he is trying, she said carefully. I believe it costs him every day. But trying is not the same as succeeding. And succeeding will mean nothing if it still costs lives like your sister's, or yours. The boy sat slowly. Several others exchanged glances. Then the older woman spoke again. And if we say no? If we say we're done bleeding for any of them? Leora smiled, small, sad, bright. Then you walk away. You take your children, your elders, your smiths, your scouts, and you find a valley no map remembers. You build something new. And if anyone comes to burn it down, you decide then whether to fight, or whether the life you've made is worth more than their pride. A long breath moved through the hall like wind through dry grass. One by one, people began to stand, not in salute, not in oath, but simply to be seen. Some raised a fist, some simply nodded. A few remained seated, arms folded, eyes thoughtful. It was not unity, not yet. It was possibility. When the last voice fell quiet, Victor finally stepped forward. He did not climb the platform. He stopped at its base and looked up at her. You spoke truth tonight, he said, loud enough for every ear in the room. Now we see who listens. He turned to the crowd. Tomorrow we open the forges. Tomorrow we mend what is broken, walls, blades, hearts. Tomorrow we choose. A low growl of agreement rose, not war cry, but something deeper. Recognition. Leora stepped down. Victor met her at the bottom step. Their eyes locked. In the flickering brazier light she saw everything he did not say. Pride, fear, a fierce and quiet joy that matched her own. She reached out and rested her palm against his chest, just over the steady thunder of his heart. He covered her hand with his own. They stood like that while the hall slowly emptied, while shadows lengthened and braziers burned low. No words, no promises. Only the shared heat of two people who had finally stopped running from what they felt. Outside in the high passes, the first snow of the season began to fall. Soft, silent, inevitable. Somewhere far to the west, campfires glowed along Silverclaw lines. Somewhere closer in the hidden valleys, new fires were being lit. And in the heart of Blackthorn Keep, two hearts beat in stubborn, beautiful rhythm, aching with the cost of what was coming, alive with the fragile, radiant certainty of what might still be saved. Chapter 8, Tides of Vengeance. The first snow of the season did not melt. It thickened through the night, blanketing the valley in heavy white silence, muffling every sound until the world felt wrapped in cotton and secrets. Dawn arrived pale and reluctant, the sky the color of old steel. Leora woke to the sight of flakes still drifting past her narrow window, slow, deliberate like the last breaths of something dying. She dressed in layers of dark wool and leather, strapped the knife to her thigh again and went down to the lower hall. The space that had held quiet possibility the night before now thrummed with purpose. Forges had been lit before first light. The air carried the sharp bite of heated metal and coal smoke. Warriors moved in steady currents, sharpening blades, checking bowstrings, packing dried meat and bandages into saddlebags. No one shouted orders. No one needed to. The choice had been made in the dark hours after she spoke, and now it moved through them like blood through veins. Victor found her near the main forge, where a broad-shouldered smith was hammering the edge of a longsword into lethal keenness. He did not greet her with words. He simply handed her a rolled parchment sealed with black wax. She broke the seal. The map inside showed the western passes, Silverclaw supply lines marked in red ink, vulnerable choke points circled in charcoal. A single line of tighter script ran along the bottom edge. They move at first light tomorrow. 3 companies. Light cavalry. They aim to cut the northern ridge and force surrender before the deep snow locks the valley. Leora's fingers tightened on the edges until the parchment creased. How long have your scouts known? Since midnight, Victor answered. They rode through the storm to bring it. She looked up at him. His face was calm, but the amber in his eyes had gone dark and restless, like fire banked under ash. They're coming for me, she said quietly. They're coming for what they think they lost, he corrected. The difference matters. She folded the map and tucked it inside her tunic next to her own heartbeat. Then we meet them before they reach the ridge. Victor studied her for a long moment. You don't have to lead the intercept. I know. Her voice stayed soft, but the steel beneath it rang clear. I choose to. He exhaled through his nose, a sound that carried both surrender and fierce pride. Then we ride at dusk before the moon rises. The day passed in a blur of preparation and quiet intensity. Leora moved among the shadow fangs, Not as a queen, not as a guest, but as one of them. She helped pack quivers, checked saddle girths, listened when a young archer confessed his hands shook when he thought of killing someone he once called friend. She did not offer empty comfort. She simply stayed, let him speak until the trembling eased, then handed him a fresh bowstring and a nod that said, "You are not alone." By late afternoon, the storm had eased into a steady, windless fall. The valley looked like it had been dusted with powdered sugar. Beautiful, deceptive, deadly. They gathered at the northern gate as the light began to bleed from the sky. 50 riders, lean, silent, faces painted with ash streaks for night work. Victor sat a massive black gelding at the front. Leora rode beside him on a gray mare whose coat matched the snow. No banners, no horns, only the soft creak of leather and the muffled thud of hooves. They moved out in a long, narrow column, cutting through the drifts like a blade through silk. The ride to the ambush point took hours, up narrow trails across frozen streams, past stands of pine that whispered as they passed. No one spoke much. Words felt too heavy, too fragile for what lay ahead. When they reached the choke point, a narrow defile between two sheer rock faces, Victor signaled halt. They dismounted, sent the horses back with 2 youths to guard them, then took positions along the upper slopes. Bows strung. Blades loosened in sheaths. Breath fogging the air in slow clouds. Leora crouched beside Victor behind a fallen boulder, snow dusting her shoulders. She could feel the pulse in her throat, steady, not frantic. The old grief still lived there, curled tight around memories of Darius's voice, his hands, the way he used to look at her like she was the only light in his sky. But it no longer choked her. It simply existed. A scar that ached in cold weather but no longer bled. Below them, the past lay empty and white. She turned her head slightly. "Victor." He glanced at her. "If it comes to it, if I have to face him again, I won't hesitate." "I know. Not because I hate him." Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for him. "Because I refuse to let love become a leash." Something raw flashed across his face. Pain, understanding, a fierce and tender joy that made her chest tighten. He reached out and brushed a snowflake from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. The touch lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary, warm against the cold, steady against the storm inside her. "Then we end this cleanly," he said, "and for everyone." She nodded once. They waited. The moon rose thin and silver, painting the snow in ghostly light. Then movement. First the scouts, dark shapes gliding along the edges of the pass. Then the main column, 3 companies just as the map said. Horses blowing steam, armor muffled with cloth, banners furled to avoid snagging branches. At the head rode a tall figure in gray, cloak whipping behind him. Darius. Even at this distance she knew the set of his shoulders, the way he rode as though carrying the weight of stars. Leora's breath caught, not in longing, not in rage, but in a strange piercing clarity. She had loved him once with every fiber of her being. She still felt the echo of it, soft and sad and final, but she no longer belonged to it. Victor's hand found hers in the snow, brief, strong, grounding. She squeezed once. Then she rose. The shadow fangs rose with her. Arrows knocked. Blades drawn. A single low whistle carried down the line. The pass held its breath. And in that suspended heartbeat, before steel met steel, before blood-stained snow, Leora felt it. A fierce, aching happiness so bright it hurt. Not victory, not vengeance. The terrible, lovely certainty that she was finally free to choose her own ending. She lifted her chin to the moon and stepped forward into the night. Chapter 9, Shattered Crowns. The whistle cut the night like a blade. Arrows hissed downward in a black rain. The pass erupted. Horses screamed, men shouted. Steel rang against steel as the first wave of Silverclaw riders met the ambush. Snow churned to pink beneath hooves and boots. Leora moved with the shadow fangs down the eastern slope, fast, silent, precise, her blade already drawn, heart slamming against her ribs with something fiercer than fear. She did not seek Darius in the chaos, not yet. She fought beside the others, deflecting a lance that would have taken a young archer through the throat, shoving a fallen comrade back to his feet, shouting once, sharp, clear, to redirect a flank that had begun to waver. Every motion felt both foreign and deeply known, as though her body had been waiting years to remember how to protect instead of merely endure. Across the defile, Darius's banner, silver wolf on gray, snapped in the wind until an arrow found its bearer and it fell into the snow. She saw him then. He was in the thick of it, cloak torn, sword a silver blur as he parried two attackers at once. Blood streaked his face, not all his own. His eyes found hers across the melee for one suspended heartbeat. No plea lived there. No command. Only recognition, raw, final, heartbreaking. He lowered his blade a fraction. The shadow fangs surged forward. Leora stepped into the open ground between them. "Hold," she cried. The word carried over the din, not because it was loud, but because it came from her. The fighting faltered. A ragged circle formed around the two of them, Silver Claw and Shadow Fang alike, blades still raised, breaths heaving clouds into the freezing air. Darius straightened slowly. His sword point dropped to the snow. "Leora," he said, the name sounded like surrender. She walked toward him, slow, deliberate, until only 3 paces separated them. The wind howled through the pass. Snow swirled between them like ghosts of everything they had lost. "You came," she said quietly. "I had to see if there was anything left to save." She searched his face, the scar on his cheek, the exhaustion carved deep around his eyes, the stubborn hope that had once made her believe in forever. "There is," she answered, "just not the way you imagined." He swallowed. "Then tell me what way." She lifted her chin. "Stand down your men. Pull back to the western passes. Let the snow close the routes until spring. Use the time, not to rebuild an army, but to rebuild trust. Listen to the packs who have bled longest. Give them voice. Give them choice. If you do that, if you prove the crown can bend without breaking, then perhaps one day we meet again, not as enemies, not as lovers, but as people who once shared the same sky." Darius looked at the faces around them. His own warriors, weary and bleeding. Victor's fierce and unyielding. He looked at the snow now stained crimson, at the bodies already growing still. Then he looked back at her. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, voice cracking on the last word. "I don't know if they'll follow." "Then start with yourself," she said gently. "One choice at a time. The rest will follow, or it won't. But at least it will be honest." A long silence fell. Then Darius turned to his remaining captains. "Fall back," he ordered. His voice carried no thunder, only weight. "Sound the retreat. We return to the western holds. No pursuit, no rearguard action. We go home." Murmurs rose. Shock, relief, anger. But no one defied him. Slowly, painfully, the Silver Claws began to disengage, helping their wounded, gathering fallen banners, retreating step by grudging step up the pass. Darius remained where he was. He sheathed his sword. Then he sank to one knee in the snow, not in fealty, not in defeat, but in something quieter. "I loved you enough to ruin you," he said, so low only she could hear. "I hope one day I learn to love you enough to let you go." Tears burned behind her eyes, not for what might have been, but for what had been real once before pride and power poisoned it. She stepped forward. She rested her hand lightly on the top of his bowed head, just for a moment. "Then learn," she whispered, "for both our sakes." She stepped back. Darius rose. He looked at her one last time, long, searching, memorizing. Then he turned and walked away through the drifting snow, flanked by the last of his guard. The pass grew quiet. Only the wind remained, carrying away the echoes of battle. Victor appeared at her side, silent until that moment. Blood streaked his forearm, but he moved without pain. Only purpose. He did not ask if she was all right. He simply stood with her, shoulder to shoulder, watching the Silver Claws disappear into the white. After a time he spoke. "You gave him a path. I gave him a mirror," she corrected softly. "Whether he looks into it is his burden now." Victor turned to face her fully. Snow had caught in his dark hair, in the creases of his eyes. He looked older in the moonlight, worn, unbreakable, beautiful in his quiet strength. "And you?" he asked. "What path do you choose now?" She looked up at him, really looked, and felt the answer bloom inside her chest, bright and aching and true. "I choose the life I am building," she said. "Here, with people who see me not as a prize, not as a queen, but as the woman who stayed and fought and refused to be small again." His throat moved. She reached up, slow, deliberate, and brushed snow from his cheek with her fingertips. He caught her wrist gently, not to stop her, but to hold the touch a moment longer. "Then stay," he said, voice rough with everything he had never allowed himself to say aloud. "Not because you have nowhere else. Because you want to be here." She smiled, small, sad at the edges, radiant at the center. "I do." He exhaled, a sound like relief, like joy, like something finally coming home. They stood like that while the snow continued to fall, soft, relentless, covering the blood, the broken steel, the old wounds. Around them, the Shadowfangs began to gather their own, tending the injured, collecting the dead with quiet reverence, preparing to withdraw back to the keep. No cheers rose. No songs of triumph, only the low murmur of people who had survived another night, who had chosen something larger than vengeance. Leora felt it then, the full, piercing weight of what she had done. She had shattered a crown. She had not worn a new one in its place. Instead, she had chosen to stand barefoot in the snow beside a man who saw her scars and called them strength. A fierce, trembling happiness moved through her, painful in its clarity, lovely in its honesty. She was no longer the woman who had been sold. She was the woman who had learned her own worth and refused to let anyone forget it. She turned her face to the moon, and for the first time in too long, she breathed without apology. Chapter 10, Dawn of Reckoning. The snow kept falling long after the last. Silverclaw banner vanished into the white haze of the pass. It fell in thick, silent curtains, covering the churned ground, the broken blades, the places where blood had soaked through to pink ice. By the time the survivors began the slow march back to Blackthorn Keep, the battlefield looked almost peaceful, clean, as though the night's violence had been only a dream. The mountain refused to remember. Leora walked at the rear of the column, not because she lagged, but because she needed the distance, needed to feel the cold bite her cheeks, the weight of her own boots in the snow, the steady rhythm of breath in and breath out. Victor rode ahead, organizing stretchers for the wounded, directing scouts to sweep the flanks one last time. He glanced back once, only once, and their eyes met across the drifting white. No words passed. None were needed. The look said enough. We survived. We choose what comes next. The keep gates opened before them like arms that had waited too long. Inside the walls, the air smelled of wood smoke, mulled wine, and the sharp, clean scent of pine branches dragged in for the hearths. People lined the courtyard, not cheering, not weeping, just standing. Silent witnesses. Mothers held children high so they could see. Elders leaned on staffs and nodded slowly. A young girl, perhaps 8, stepped forward and pressed a small, braided cord of red wool into Leora's gloved hand. "For courage," the girl whispered. Leora knelt so their eyes were level. "Thank you," she said, and tied the cord around her wrist. Beside the faint scar from iron, manacles long since removed. Inside the great hall, fires roared. Tables had been pushed back. Furs spread on the floor for the injured. Healers moved with quiet efficiency. Bandages, poultices, murmured words. Leora helped where she could, holding a warrior's hand while a broken arrow was drawn, carrying water, listening when someone needed to speak of what they had seen and done and lost. Hours passed. Dawn arrived gray and thin, light seeping through high windows like spilled milk. She found Victor on the upper balcony that overlooked the valley. He stood alone, forearms braced on the stone parapet, watching the snow continue its patient work of erasure. His cloak was still dusted white. A fresh bandage wrapped his forearm where a blade had bitten deep. He did not turn when she approached. He simply shifted slightly, making space beside him. She stepped up, leaned her elbows on the cold stone, and looked out at the same view. The valley lay hushed beneath its blanket. Far ridges rose pale and distant. Somewhere beyond them, Darius and what remained of his forces were retreating, wounded in pride as much as body, carrying questions heavier than any armor. After a long silence, Victor spoke. "You gave him mercy." Chapter 10, Dawn of Reckoning. The snow kept falling long after the last. Silverclaw banner vanished into the white haze of the pass. It fell in thick, silent curtains, covering the churned ground, the broken blades, the places where blood had soaked through to pink ice. By the time the survivors began the slow march back to Blackthorn Keep, the battlefield looked almost peaceful, clean, as though the night's violence had been only a dream. The mountain refused to remember. Leora walked at the rear of the column, not because she lagged, but because she needed the distance, needed to feel the cold bite her cheeks, the weight of her own boots in the snow, the steady rhythm of breath in and breath out. Victor rode ahead, organizing stretchers for the wounded, directing scouts to sweep the flanks one last time. He glanced back once, only once, and their eyes met across the drifting white. No words passed. None were needed. The look said enough. We survived. We choose what comes next. The keep gates opened before them like arms that had waited too long. Inside the walls, the air smelled of wood smoke, mulled wine, and the sharp, clean scent of pine branches dragged in for the hearths. People lined the courtyard, not cheering, not weeping, just standing. Silent witnesses. Mothers held children high so they could see. Elders leaned on staffs and nodded slowly. A young girl, perhaps 8, stepped forward and pressed a small, braided cord of red wool into Leora's gloved hand. For courage, the girl whispered. Leora knelt so their eyes were level. Thank you, she said, and tied the cord around her wrist. Beside the faint scar from iron, manacles long since removed. Inside the great hall, fires roared. Tables had been pushed back, furs spread on the floor for the injured. Healers moved with quiet efficiency. Bandages, poultices, murmured words. Leora helped where she could, holding a warrior's hand while a broken arrow was drawn carrying water, listening when someone needed to speak of what they had seen and done and lost. Hours passed. Dawn arrived gray and thin, light seeping through high windows like spilled milk. She found Victor on the upper balcony that overlooked the valley. He stood alone, forearms braced on the stone parapet, watching the snow continue its patient work of erasure. His cloak was still dusted white. A fresh bandage wrapped his forearm where a blade had bitten deep. He did not turn when she approached. He simply shifted slightly, making space beside him. She stepped up, leaned her elbows on the cold stone, and looked out at the same view. The valley lay hushed beneath its blanket. Far ridges rose pale and distant. Somewhere beyond them, Darius and what remained of his forces were retreating, wounded in pride as much as body, carrying questions heavier than any armor. After a long silence, Victor spoke. You gave him mercy. I gave him time, she corrected gently. Mercy he will have to earn from his people, from himself. Victor turned his head just enough to study her profile. And you? What do you earn now? She exhaled a small cloud of breath. Space to breathe without apology. A place where my choices matter because they are mine, not because someone else wrote them into a bargain. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his cloak and drew out a small object. A thin circlet of dark iron. No jewels, no filigree, only clean, unadorned strength. He held it between them. I had this forged months ago, he said quietly, before the first snow, before I knew what you would choose. She looked at the circlet. Simple, honest, forged for someone who carried scars and still stood tall. It is not a crown, he continued. It is a promise that whatever path you walk here, you walk it beside someone who sees you entire, broken edges, fierce heart, all of it. Her throat tightened. She lifted her eyes to his. He did not place the circlet on her head. He simply offered it, open palm, steady gaze. She reached out. Her fingers closed around the cool metal. She did not put it on. Instead, she stepped closer. Close enough that she could feel the heat of him through wool and leather. Close enough to see the faint tremor in the hand that held nothing now. I accept the promise, she said, voice soft but certain. And I make one of my own. She lifted the circlet between them, then slowly, carefully slipped it onto her own wrist beside the child's red cord. It rested there like a quiet vow. I choose this place, she told him. These people. This life we are building, one honest choice at a time. I choose you, not because you saved me, but because you never asked me to be less than I am. Victor's breath caught, once sharp, almost inaudible. Then he exhaled, and the sound carried everything he had held back for so long. Grief for battles past, fear of battles yet to come, and beneath it all a joy so fierce it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He reached up, slow, reverent, and brushed a snowflake from her lashes with the pad of his thumb. Neither moved to close the final distance. They did not need to. The moment itself was enough. Two people standing on a balcony above a sleeping valley, wrists marked by the same simple band, hearts beating in stubborn, beautiful rhythm. Below them, the keep slowly woke. Voices rose, quiet laughter, the clatter of breakfast being prepared, children running through corridors. Life, stubborn and insistent, continued. Leora looked out at the valley one last time. Somewhere in the west, Darius would wake to the same dawn, carrying his own reckoning. Here she carried hers, not as burden, but as beginning. A small, radiant smile curved her lips, sad at the memory of what had been lost, luminous with the certainty of what had been found. She turned back to Victor. "Shall we go down?" she asked. He nodded. Together, they left the balcony side by side. The snow kept falling, soft, patient, covering the old scars of the world. And in the heart of Blackthorn Keep, two people walked into the new day. Not as king and queen, not as savior and saved, but simply as themselves. Whole, free, alive. The snow has settled. The pass is quiet. Two hearts, once broken, now beating side by side, stand at the edge of something new. But this story isn't over. It lives in you now. If Leora's quiet defiance stirred something inside your chest, if the ache of lost love and the fierce joy of chosen freedom made your pulse quicken, if you felt the terrible, lovely weight of deciding who you will become when everything you trusted falls away, then stay with her a little longer. Share this tale. Whisper her name to someone who needs to remember they are allowed to walk away from what no longer honors them. Tell them there is power in choosing yourself, not out of anger, but out of love for the life still waiting. Drop a single line in the comments. "I choose myself," or "I'm still learning how," or simply, "Leora." Let the world know you heard her. Let the quiet ones see they are not alone, because every time someone says her name, another chain breaks. Another crown loses its grip. Another heart remembers it never needed permission to be free. So speak her name. Share this story. And if it moved you, if it hurt in the best way, hit that like. Leave that comment. Share it with the person who needs to read it tonight. The dawn is breaking. The reckoning is here. And it begins with you. What will you choose?